In early April 1944, the rolling hills outside of Hearne, Texas, were turning from winter brown to spring green. Bluebonnets painted the edges of the two-lane roads, and cattle wandered lazily under the wide skies. But among the locals, there was a new kind of tension, one that came not from warfront news or ration lines, but from the slow-building rumors that the Germans were coming. Not invaders, not spies, prisoners, hundreds of them. When the first train hissed into the makeshift depot near the newly constructed Camp Hearne, few residents dared get close. The military police had already secured the perimeter, and the long line of dusty, sunburnt men stepping off the boxcars didn't look like monsters. They looked tired, too thin, too young. Some limped. Some stared straight ahead. Others gazed around in disbelief, as if the very idea of being so far from Europe, so far from war, was itself another kind of prison. Among them was Otto Becker, a 24-year-old from Bavaria, with dirt under his nails and frostbite scars from the Eastern Front, before the war. He had been a cobbler like his father and grandfather. Now, with his Wehrmacht jacket confiscated and a canvas armband labeled PW strapped to his arm, Otto was just another ghost in the machine, another German POW deposited in the American heartland. Camp Hearne wasn't what they expected. Most had been warned of harsh treatment, starvation, forced labor. What greeted them was strange, orderly, and quiet. Barracks built from lumber that still smelled of sap. Toilets, showers, clean beds. Cots, yes, but dry ones. There was even a mess hall that served warm food, beans, rice, cornbread. Otto didn't trust it. Neither did his bunkmate Eric, a former librarian from Cologne who quoted Goethe before bed. They had seen too much. They knew how quickly comfort turned to punishment. At roll call the next morning, they were given tasks. Some would be sent to repair fencing around the camp. Others would be assigned to local farms in labor detail, a program authorized under the Geneva Convention. The Americans didn't have enough manpower at home. With their own boys overseas, German prisoners were now pulling cotton, baling hay, fixing barns, and in some cases, even harvesting peaches. Otto was assigned to work on the Grover family farm, a modest property run by a widowed farmer named Calvin Grover and his daughter, Rose, barely 20 and tough as nails. When Otto and Eric arrived under MP escort, Calvin greeted them with a nod and said, "You break anything, you fix it. You steal anything, you don't come back." Then he turned away and told them to grab shovels. They expected curses. They expected spit. What they got was indifference. Rose never made eye contact. Calvin gave orders like a drill sergeant, but never raised his voice. They worked from sunup to sundown, fixing a chicken coop, digging ditches, and repairing a water pump. At noon, Rose left a plate of sandwiches on a stump. No words, just food. It went on like that for weeks. Quiet labor. Silent tension. Otto and Eric spoke only in whispers. They slept like stones in their bunks. But something shifted one morning when Calvin's pickup wouldn't start. Otto, who had fixed engines in Munich before the war, instinctively leaned over the hood and pointed. Calvin narrowed his eyes and handed him a wrench. An hour later, the truck was running. Calvin muttered, "Guess you're good for something after all." The next day, the sandwiches came with fresh apples. In camp, word was spreading. Some Americans were cruel. Others were kind. But most just didn't care. They wanted the war over, their sons home, their lives back. The Germans, Otto included, were beginning to see that this wasn't Europe. There were no bombed cities, no marching columns, no swastikas or Sieg Heils, only endless fields, long shadows, and the distant sound of radios playing gospel music. One Sunday in June, everything changed. The camp commander, Captain Wallace, announced a new pilot program. Local churches, with Army permission, could sponsor POWs for Sunday meals and religious services. It was meant to build goodwill. Most Germans scoffed at the idea. Who wanted to be paraded around like circus animals? Otto refused the first offer. So did Eric. But when their names came up again, they were ordered to go. They arrived at the First Baptist Church of Herne dressed in clean, khakis with fresh-shaved faces and ironed collars. Rose Grover, of all people, met them on the steps. "You're with us today," she said, leading them to a faded red pickup. Otto sat in silence all the way to the farm. Dinner was on the porch: fried chicken, potatoes, collard greens. Calvin said grace with a bowed head and trembling voice. No one mentioned the war. No one spoke of Hitler, or bombs, or blood. Instead, Rose asked, "What's Bavaria like?" Otto talked about the Alps. Eric mentioned bookstores on narrow streets. Rose listened. Later, as they stood near the barn, Calvin lit a cigarette and said, "My boy was in the Pacific. Haven't heard from him in 8 months. Don't know if he's dead or just done writing." Otto didn't know what to say. He wanted to offer something: sympathy, guilt, but there was nothing. Only the chirp of cicadas and the sound of a world neither of them could control. When they returned to camp that night, Otto felt something had cracked open inside him. Not a wound, not guilt, but a kind of confusion. How could he reconcile the image of his enemy with the warmth of that porch? With cornbread? With a girl who asked about Bavarian lakes? Eric said, "They're not like us." Otto replied, "Or maybe they are." In the weeks that followed, more Sunday visits came. More meals. More conversations. Otto began teaching Calvin how to sharpen blades with less wear. He helped Rose paint the barn. One afternoon, she asked if he'd ever been in love. He said yes. Her name was Lenny. She had black curls and a laugh that echoed. Rose smiled. "She sounds like trouble." Otto smiled back. He was still a prisoner. Still a number. But something had shifted. He was no longer counting days. He was noticing them. And in a land that once felt like exile, he was beginning to wonder when the war ended. Would he ever really go home? By late July, the days had grown hotter, and the Texas sun bore down with a vengeance that made even seasoned farmers wince. The men in Camp Herne labored in the heat with damp collars and sun-reddened necks. But for Otto, something had shifted. Work no longer felt like punishment. The routine, the early wake-up call, the transport to the Grover farm, the same dull tools had become, inexplicably, a kind of comfort. Eric, by contrast, grew quieter. He still quoted Goethe on occasion, but his voice had lost the whimsical tone. He missed books, missed writing. He missed cologne's smell after the rain. One evening, while folding his camp-issue shirt, he said to Otto, "I think I'm starting to forget my brother's face." Is that normal? Otto didn't know. He was forgetting things too: his mother's voice, the streets of Munich, even Lenny's laugh. The more Texas filled his days, the more Germany faded into a kind of dream dot at the Grover farm. Calvin had slowly allowed Otto and Eric into more responsibilities. They were no longer just shoveling manure or patching fences. They were trusted with the tractor, with the feed orders, even the tool shed. "If you break something, fix it," Calvin still said, but now there was a smile behind it. Rose had also changed. She no longer dropped food silently. She talked about the droughts, about rationing, about her late mother's peach pie. One day she asked Otto to teach her a few words in German. Just enough to impress a visiting general, she joked. They laughed. Then came the fence. It started with a storm a sudden. Summer tempest that knocked down a section of the eastern perimeter of the Grover land. Calvin cursed the wind and said he'd need 2 full days to fix it. Otto volunteered. "I've built worse," he said. Calvin raised an eyebrow. "You're good with your hands? That's for sure." He and Eric were given permission, under watch, to spend both days repairing the damage. But when the MP assigned to oversee them had a family emergency, Calvin signed a paper saying he'd take full responsibility. For the first time since they arrived in America, Otto and Eric were alone, truly alone, with no guards and no fences. The two Germans stood in the middle of the broken fence line with the tools in hand, the open road just a half-mile away. Eric looked at Otto and whispered, "We could go. You know that, right? Disappear into Mexico. Start over. They'd never find us." Otto stared at the horizon. Freedom real, unlawful, immediate freedom was right there. The thought gripped him. The temptation was raw. But then he thought of Calvin's hands, rough and tired, of Rose's awkward German, of the Sunday meals and quiet smiles. He turned to Eric. "Run to what?" "We're ghosts already." They stayed. They worked until sunset, sweating through their shirts, driving new posts, stringing wire. When Calvin returned, he said nothing about the choice they hadn't made. But he left a jug of cold lemonade and 2 slices of peach pie on the porch. That night, back in camp, the air was thick and still. Fireflies blinked lazily in the darkness. Otto sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. "You ever think we were meant to be here?" he asked. Eric scoffed. "Meant? We're prisoners, Otto." "Yeah, but maybe fate isn't always about winning or losing. Maybe it's about what we learn in between." Eric didn't reply. He turned away and pulled the blanket over his shoulders. The following week brought news. Camp Hearn would soon receive a new shipment of POWs from North Africa. The camp would be reorganizing. Some existing prisoners would be transferred to make room. Otto and Eric were both on the list. Otto's chest tightened. The thought of leaving the Grover farm, of not seeing Rose again, felt worse than leaving Munich had. He asked Calvin directly, "Is there anything you can do to keep us here?" Calvin shrugged. "I'm just a farmer, Otto. I can't stop Uncle Sam from reshuffling his chessboard. But I can write a letter. Say you've been helpful. Honest, that you've earned more than transfer." The letter went out. Otto didn't sleep for 3 nights. Rose barely spoke during their last Sunday meal. When he stood to leave, she grabbed his hand, just for a second, and said, "If you go, I hope it's someplace kind." He nodded. Texas has been kind. Then came the miracle. Captain Wallace called Otto to his office, a rare occurrence. "You've been reassigned," the captain said flatly. Otto's heart dropped. "But not far," Wallace added. "Camp Swift, over near Bastrop. They're building a new chapel and need good labor." Otto wanted to protest. He didn't care about chapels. He cared about the Grovers. But he knew better than to speak out. Eric wasn't so lucky. He was sent to Nebraska. "Snow again," he muttered, clutching his duffel bag. Their goodbye was short. No dramatic speeches. Just a handshake. "Write me if they let you," Eric said. Otto promised Dot at Camp Swift things were different. Bigger, more structured. Fewer personal touches. The food was the same, but the faces weren't. The guards were colder. The Texans didn't come to the gate with baskets of peaches or invitations to dinner. Otto kept his head down and worked the chapel construction with quiet precision. But his mind was elsewhere. On the fence. On the lemonade. On Rose. Then, one Sunday in September, a miracle walked through the gates. It was Rose. She stood at the checkpoint in a blue dress, holding a paper with a signature from the camp's chaplain. "We're building a library," she said. "They said you could help." Otto felt his knees go weak. The chaplain escorted them to a makeshift study room. Rose didn't say much. She just opened a box of books and smiled. I told them you were good at organizing, and that you liked maps. He did. They spent the afternoon sorting volumes, labeling shelves. At one point, their hands touched over a copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Rose looked up. You think your Lenny would like it here? Otto paused. I don't think about her much anymore. Silence. Outside, the fireflies had returned. And somewhere beyond the fences, beyond the war and the uniforms and the flags, a new kind of peace was beginning to take root. Otto Becker, once a cobbler, now a prisoner, now a builder of chapels and libraries, realized something that day. He might never go home to Germany, but maybe, just maybe, he'd found something better. Camp Swift felt like a different world, even though it was just 80 miles southeast of Herne. Gone were the fields of waving grass, the whinny of Grover's horses, the evening calls of frogs near the fence line. In their place were construction sites, the sharp echo of hammers on concrete, and the cold gaze of guards who hadn't yet learned that these men weren't monsters. Otto found himself surrounded by strangers Germans from different regiments, different corners of the Reich, with different attitudes. Some still clung to Hitler's propaganda. Others kept quiet, unsure what to believe anymore. There were fights. There were punishments. The camaraderie he had built at Herne was absent here. He kept to himself, speaking only when spoken to, but something was changing in him. Every swing of the hammer on the chapel walls reminded him that he was still capable of building something that could last beyond the war. This wasn't just labor, it was legacy. When Rose returned each Sunday to help with the new library wing, she brought more than books. She brought life. She brought the sound of English spoken with kindness. And more importantly, she brought the feeling that maybe, just maybe, Otto wasn't invisible anymore. They never spoke of love. That would have been too dangerous, too complicated. But there was something in the way she stayed a little longer each week. Something in the way she laughed more freely when Otto read passages from American novels in his heavy accent. Steinbeck, Faulkner, Hemingway. She liked Hemingway best. Simple and sharp, she said. Like Texas. Otto smiled. And like you. She blushed in early October, as the walls of the chapel neared completion. A chaplain named Reverend Morris approached Otto. You've got good hands, he said, and a good heart. I could use a man like you in the afternoons. We're starting English lessons for the new arrivals. Otto hesitated. I'm not a teacher. You're not a soldier either, Morris replied. Not anymore. You're something in between. That's who makes the best teachers. So Otto began teaching just a few hours a week. Simple phrases at first. Where is the food? How do I write home? Then, slowly, conversations, debates. One afternoon, a young POW named Lucas asked, why do Americans treat us better than our own officers ever did? Otto had no answer. The other prisoners began to respect him. Not because he was strong or loud, but because he listened. Because he didn't pretend to have all the answers. And because he carried himself with quiet dignity. Then came the letter. One gray morning, the camp warden handed Otto a folded envelope marked with the return address of Camp Herne. It was from Eric Dott. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Otto, I am well. Nebraska is cold. The land is flat. They say it stretches forever, like a sigh. I teach now, too. Imagine that 2 German boys teaching in America. Dot, do you remember the fence we could have walked away from? I still think about it. Not with regret, but with curiosity. What would have happened? Would we be in Mexico now? In hiding? Instead, I met a girl. Her name is Martha. She's a nurse. She brings books to the chapel every Tuesday. I think I'm in love. Stay alive, brother. Don't lose yourself. We may be ghosts here, but even ghosts can leave footprints. Otto read the letter twice, then tucked it under his pillow. That night, he told Rose about it. She smiled. Love finds strange places, she said. Otto nodded. So does freedom. That weekend, he carved a small wooden cross from scrap lumber and mounted it near the chapel door. On its base, he etched a message not in German, not in English, but in silence. A blank space for something to be filled later. Perhaps by time. Perhaps by memory. The guards began calling him the professor. It was half a joke, but Otto didn't mind. He liked the new role. He taught. He built. He translated sermons when the chaplain's voice got too fast. And through it all, he waited for word on whether he'd be transferred again. Then, one afternoon, the news arrived. Camp Swift was preparing for downsizing. Dozens of POWs would be moved north. Otto's name was on the list. This time, no letters helped. No chaplains intervened. No favors from Rose. He was to be relocated to a facility near Chicago. A colder place. A harder place. His last day at Swift came with little ceremony. Reverend Morris gave him a pocket Bible with his name inscribed. The guard shook his hand. Rose didn't come. He rode the train in silence, heart heavy. But as the plains of Texas slipped away and the frost of the Midwest crept into the windows, Otto realized something. Texas was no longer just a location on a map. It was a chapter. One he'd carry with him forever. Camp Chicago was strict. Industrial. Loud. The food was worse. The guards sterner. But something inside Otto had changed. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a man who had taught, who had built a chapel, who had turned down escape for integrity. And then, weeks later, a package arrived. No note, just a book Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. Inside was a single pressed flower. A Texas bluebonnet. Otto didn't cry. But he sat on his bunk for hours, holding the book, staring at the flower like it held the entire state in its petals. And in a way, it did. Winter in Chicago was not kind. Snow pressed down on the rooftops of the camp like a silent verdict. Boots crunched on icy gravel as guards made their rounds. In the barracks, the radiator clanked with tired wheezes, struggling to fight back the cold that seeped in through cracked windows. Otto wrapped himself in his coat every night and pulled his blanket tight. But it wasn't the cold that kept him awake. It was the silence. Texas had been full of sound. Even behind fences, even under watchful eyes, life had buzzed laughter, music, horses, sermons, books being read aloud. Here the days were colorless. The men worked in the camp's laundry, folded uniforms, repaired shoes. They didn't speak much. They didn't dream much either. Otto tried to stay busy. He helped older prisoners write letters home. He taught a few younger ones to read English, but they didn't care about Faulkner or Steinbeck. They wanted war news, rumors of the Reich collapsing, whispers of Germany's surrender. Otto gave them what little he had, though he'd stopped believing in war a long time ago. One evening, a new transfer arrived, Carl, from a camp in Louisiana. He had bright eyes and jittery hands, like a bird trapped in a cage. Over dinner, he leaned in and whispered, "I met a man from Herne. He told me about you. Said you and your friend could have escaped." Otto didn't respond. Carl went on, "Why didn't you?" Otto stirred his soup. "Because there are worse things than fences." Carl scoffed. "Like what?" "Living without honor," Otto said. "Or forgetting who you are." Carl didn't speak to him again. The war ended in April. There were no trumpets, no celebrations. Just a quiet announcement over the loudspeaker. Germany has surrendered. The war is over. A few prisoners wept. Most simply sat in stunned silence. The war had shaped their entire identity. Now they were. What? Survivors? Losers? Strangers in a land they didn't belong to? Some clung to hope they'd be sent home soon. Others feared what they'd return to. Bombed cities. Missing families. Trials. Otto didn't know what waited for him in Germany. He wasn't even sure he wanted to find out. One morning, while sweeping the chapel, a guard approached with a small package. "This came for you," he said, handing it over with a nod. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Otto sat on the bench and opened it slowly. Inside was a photographic chapel wall with sunlight pouring through stained glass. On the back, in Rose's handwriting, "The chapel is finished. We dedicated it to those who healed, not those who fought." Beneath the photo was a small leather journal. Inside were pressed flowers from the Texas field, pages of notes in her hand. Sermons she'd heard, stories she'd remembered, sketches of bluebonnets and church pews. The very back, a letter. "Otto, I don't know where this will find you. I hope you are safe. I hope you are warm. I wanted you to know that we kept going. We finished what we started. The kids ask about you. Reverend Morris still calls you Professor. I think you saved more people than you know. I hope you find peace wherever you land. With all my respect, Rose." Otto held the letter for a long time. Then he placed it inside the Bible Reverend Morris had given him and slid it under his pillow. In June, the orders came. German prisoners would begin to be repatriated. Trains were scheduled. Lists were posted. Otto's name was included. He watched as other men packed their belongings, some excited, some terrified. One said, "I hope Hamburg still stands." Another asked, "Do you think they'll shoot us when we get off the train?" Otto didn't pack right away. He spent his final nights in the chapel, cleaning, polishing the wood, dusting off hymnals. No one stopped him. The night before departure, he wrote his first letter in months. It was addressed to Hearne, Texas. "To Reverend Morris and Rose, thank you for everything. I do not know if I will ever return to Texas, but I carry it with me. The chapel we built, that was not just a building. It was a turning point. If I never see America again, know that you changed one life completely. With deepest gratitude, Otto." He folded the letter, sealed it, and gave it to a guard who promised to mail it. The next morning, the train waited. Otto stepped aboard with his coat buttoned and his shoulders square. As the camp faded into the distance, he watched the landscape shift from steel and concrete to rolling plains, from barbed wire fences to wide, open skies. He didn't return to Germany. When the train stopped in New York for processing, Otto made a decision. Using what little English he had, he requested asylum. The process was long, grueling. But in the post-war chaos, America needed teachers. And Otto had references letters from Texas chaplains, testimonials from guards. They called him model prisoner, educated, respectful. By 1947, Otto was living in Kansas City. By 1951, he had become a U citizen. He taught high school literature for 34 years. He never married. But every spring, he planted bluebonnets in his garden. And every year, on the last Sunday of April, he wrote a letter to the chapel in Hearne, even if he wasn't sure it still stood.